So apologies to the previous two speakers. I helped to put the agenda together. I always get the slot straight after lunch. I decided this time I wasn't going to get the slot straight after lunch. So brilliant, really good guys. And then an apology to the rest of the room because this is an EV forum. Glyn made it very little about VAT and a lot about EV. I've just put EV in front of tax. It's going to be tax. So there you go. So I thought I'd start off by, and joking apart, whether I'm not or not, I'm not sure. Tax is a catalyst to some of this change, and clearly it's taken the government in the UK a bit of time to sort of catch up and decide what they're doing about company car taxation in the UK. They're supposed to give us 3 years worth of notice so that people can plan. Perhaps if you're ordering a vehicle on a 3-4 year cycle, you might want to know what it's going to cost in a few years' time. We got to within about 9 months of knowing what was happening. And that disrupts the marketplace, to be brutally honest, because people have got to make decisions. We've got to think about supply and uncertainty. And if you're not sure what that vehicle that you're going to order for the next 3 or 4 years is going to cost you in a couple of years' time, you may choose to hedge your bets, maybe not take that company car, etc., etc. Another factor was that HMRC swung the pendulum far too far the other way. So to give you an example of what this says is that this column on the far left is what happened up until 2019-20. So a full electric car, zero emission car, which a few years ago was 0% benefit in kind, gone up to 16%. So 16% of the list price is the amount that you pay benefit in kind tax on. They'd already announced that was going to come down, and it was coming down to 2%. So over a 4-year cycle, benefit in kind taxation for a petrol or diesel car over the previous 4 years had gone up something like 30 to 35%. So that company car you took then, you were paying tax on 30 to 35% more through the life of that vehicle, which is pretty big cost. With an electric vehicle, it went up 138%. So because you could have gone from 0 up to 16%. Then it was going down 83% to 2%. I mean, it's just a nonsense, because the government have got no idea what they're doing. We're talking about this move. They don't. I've sat in consultations with HMRC policy people, and they sit there and go, "Oh, really? Is that what happens?" And it's just a simple thing, like a couple of years ago, they were talking about expenses, and they said, "We've got a lot of people claiming extra tax relief. We don't know why." We said, "Well, a lot of people have come out of company cars, and they're using their own cars, and they're claiming mileage, where their employer pays them 12, 15 pence a mile, but you let them have 45 pence. So guess what? They're all putting extra tax claims in." "Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that's what they were doing." These are policies. This is Treasury and HMRC. Honestly, it's incredible. And so they've have to play catch up. But whilst we're all on this journey, and it is still a journey, and it's all still evolving, and the whole EV thing evolves, they've no desire to learn the new language. They just won't. So we're going to kind of have to deal with us moving to this new world and learning this new language, and then having to converse with HMRC, who is still speaking Latin, something along those lines. But they've decided, no, what we're going to do is we're going to encourage it, and we're going to encourage EVs and ultra-low emission vehicles. So anything with less than 50 grams of CO2, we're going to bring in this whole new tax regime, and it's going to be much, much cheaper. But we're also not going to catch the same cold that we caught before, and we'll also link it to range. We'll link it to EV range. So if it's full electric, then obviously it's going down to 0, and then 1 and 2 and creeping back up again. If it's less than 50 grams, it will depend upon whether that hybrid on electricity can do over 130 miles or less than 30 miles, and we'll vary that. Which is actually, for the government, quite smart, because as cars get a higher range, they can just tweak those numbers. And as cars get more efficient, they can just tweak the 50 grams down a little bit. So So maybe we've got a structure that's got a bit more longevity than the last 4 or 5 years. So they announced this off the back of the review that they did on how WLTP was going to change, because clearly WLTP is up to all the percentages, and in some cases quite dramatically, depending upon what options you take, because it's a whole new measurement now. So whilst we had the pain in the network of what WLTP did for supply, some of which still perhaps isn't sorted, if you've got an Audi on order, something like that. But they've did a review, said, yeah, we recognise it's going to have an impact. To be fair, they could have done nothing, and the whole tax take would have gone up, because you're going to have an average of 2 or 3% uplift in BIK. But they've tried, certainly for lower emission vehicles, and you'll see that this grid only goes down to 100 grams, 99 grams of CO2. It's a bit bigger than that, but I struggled to get this on the page as it was, to be brutally honest. But these are lower emission cars. It still goes down to paying tax at 37% of list price somewhere on the list. So they've tried to change this, and I think it's also quite pertinent because with what's happening in the marketplace, with supply, with perhaps change, with what's happening in costings, there's this ebb and flow between PCP, PCH, cash allowances, company cars, and we could have a bit of a flow back to company cars if they end up becoming cheaper. Because ultimately, consumers are just looking at what's it cost me in a month. You know, whether I pay that money to the taxman or whether I pay it to the leasing company, what's it costing me in my pocket? So it's something that I think it kind of is kind of relevant to the EV agenda, or that's my justification for it being there anyway. So what does it mean? Because it could be quite dramatic. Put supply to one side, put anxiety of owning an EV to one side. Under this new regime, if you could get the budget to procure the electric vehicle, which is obviously a lot more expensive, the actual tax and ultimately the employer's national insurance would be half of what it would be for a conventional diesel vehicle. So there's some big numbers involved here, because ultimately you've got your EV that goes to 16% and then 0 and then 1% and then 2%. But you've got your diesel with your 4% supplement, because diesels are dirtier, apparently. They're not, if you look at the EU standards. And HMRC were going to scrap a few years ago the tax supplement that was charged on diesels until they drew up the budget that year and realised they needed to find a few quid, and so they scrapped it. Literally, that's exactly the reason they did it. It wasn't environmental at all. It was all to do with the Treasury, which was kind of quite amusing. So there's some big sort of numbers involved, and that could influence customers' behaviours and users' behaviours. Whether the market can cope with that is be a different matter. So something worth thinking about. So one thing we saw in the company car market over the years is people moving to vans and maybe pickups, because actually they're taxed differently and they could be cheaper than having a car. But a lot of these twin cab pickups are like cars now, so are people going to go to vans? Well, something's changed really when it comes to van. I mean, the definition's there. It's there to carry goods or laden, which doesn't include people, apparently. So, although when I got the kids in the back of my car, it feels like it's goods or laden, to be brutally honest. And there are very different definitions for benefit in kind tax than there are for VAT or for vehicle excise duty. So a vehicle can have several different categorisations for tax all at the same time. But Coca-Cola decided that they were going to put their people in vans, and they had a case about whether actually they were vans or not. So they bought these vans, and they looked the same, and they were based on the same platform, but they put some seats in the back because they thought, well, we'll just make it a bit nicer for our people. And so we had some modifications either by them or by the manufacturers. And HMRC took them to court because they said, well, we don't think they are vans, we think they're cars. Because there's more tax on a car than there is on a van. So it seems like a good starting point. So there was a VW Combi Series 1, VW Combi Series 2, and a Vivaro. And pretty much not much difference to them. Apart from the Vivaro, they actually cut out and put a window in, and they bolted to half the floor, a seat, and then had a bit of storage. So it was prefixed. Whereas the VW, these combis and these transporter things, they're designed really to be very flexible. And as a consequence of that, they did quite similar. They had 2 windows, they had row seats, but they took them out in the day, carried all the stuff around, and then at night put the seats back in, and it was a car. And so they went, well, that's a car then, full stop. So the VWs were deemed to be cars, and the Vivaros weren't, even though there wasn't a lot of difference in reality. So you've got to be careful what you do. There's always been a controversy over twin cab pickups, and HMRC have always taken the view of saying, well, we'll treat it as a commercial vehicle if it can carry a ton. And they agreed with the SMMT that if you put one of those fancy cabs on the back, that as long as it doesn't take it below a ton, it's still a van. If it takes it below a ton, it's a car. Ford, in their wisdom, have taken this a real step further, and they've come up with a super pickup. So they have a twin cab Ford Ranger, very, very popular, lovely pickup truck. They brought out a Raptor. Looks incredible. It's a mean beast. It's 50-odd thousand pound plus. It's designed only to carry 620 kg. So it's a car. So they stick it outside their commercial showroom. Everybody walks past. I've sat there in the commercial showroom waiting to see a client, and these people stopping outside looking at this lovely Raptor, lovely fantastic twin cab pickup thing, coming in and go, wow, that looks great. It's a car though. Somebody told me it was a car. And they went, yeah, sorry, it's a car. And they go, well, I don't want that then. If I wanted a car, I'd go and buy a car. I'd want a twin cab pickup that looks like a car but it's really a van. That's great. So an interesting one. They've shot themselves in the foot there, I think. But lots of the people in the dealerships are driving them because they're probably the only people who can. So some things to think about in what's going on with cars and EVs and how it evolves. But I just wanted to throw in one other thing that's kind of tax related. Is obviously we've got potentially a bit of an evolution going on in relation to what a dealership looks like. Because if we've got significant investment in a dealership or some kind of business partnerships that go on in relation to the infrastructure that's going to support at the same time as dealing with ICE vehicles. So you've got EV that's going to come in, even if in 1 year over 50% of the new vehicles that year are full electric. That might be 1 million cars. We've still got another 36 million cars in the car park that are probably conventional vehicles or some measure of hybrids and electric. So we've got to be able to manage both of those infrastructures at the same time. It's a tough marketplace. Gaining profits is really hard. So we're finding a lot of dealer groups are looking at what they've got, looking at their business and saying, well, should we be doing other things to enhance allowances, improve our tax position, protect perhaps protect our assets as a business, and maybe restructuring our business so that we've got property and all the investment infrastructure goes with that in one place, and trade, which can sometimes be the more vulnerable part of the business somewhere else. So and there are, obviously tax breaks and enhancements and pitfalls to think about in doing that. So this just sort of demonstrates that it might all sit up there in one company, but should we think about moving it, particularly if we've got a sort of investments coming in or we want to protect the business, so that we put that in a different company with the property, maybe have the trade out separately beneath that or by the side of that. So some things there. If I do get any questions on that, then Gareth Peters, the corporate tax partner's in the room, and he'll be able to help me out on those.